Good afternoon, everybody. This is Ben Thorpe with Farm Equipment Magazine. I want to welcome you to our latest webinar in conjunction with the North American Equipment Dealers Association. Now, today's presenter is Michael Piercy, and he's the Vice President of Dealer Development at the North American Equipment Dealers Association. And before he gets started with his presentation, I just want to let you know about two things. So if you look at your screen and the control panel at the bottom, you'll see a Q&A icon. You can submit questions there at any time during the presentation. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll get through as many as we can so Michael can answer your questions. And we are recording this webinar, and a replay of it will be available on the website to everybody who registered. And those were my two notes. So with that, we are ready to get started. Thank you all for joining us. And Michael, I will turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you, Ben, and good afternoon, everyone. I would start by saying, as always, we appreciate the opportunity to partner with Farm Equipment Magazine, and are rather excited to share our results from the Workforce Development Survey. But before we get into the data, I want to give just a little bit of a background. I know that everyone on this call knows that workforce development is not a new topic, but it's becoming more and more relative every year. And this year's survey, like the past two, just continues to confirm it. And based on some of the results we will share today, you will see that it's not only relevant, but is also a primary concern for many dealers. As we look across our dealer channels, we see, because of consolidation, growth, retirement, the evolution of the business, new customer demands, and a variety of other things, having the right people doing the right job is vital to our success. And I would go a little further today and say it's not just having the right person doing the right job. It's also making sure the right person has access to the right training and development opportunities to do the job right. Unfortunately, we have largely failed in one or more of those areas for decades, hoping that if we do what we've always done, we'll get something different than what we've always got. And I think most of us know today that if we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got. And we're in a situation now where we really have to rethink and change the way we approach this topic if we're going to change the outcome in our organizations. Now, NAIDA's Dealer Institute has been involved in workforce development since 2015, and we've seen and experienced and been involved in multiple approaches taken by dealers to recruit and retain high quality talent, educate employees, and improve performance. But it's only been over the last few years that we've acquired the hard data through the survey to share from dealers concerning where the industry actually knows it is with workforce development. And as we look at these data over the next few minutes, you're going to see there are glaring areas of deficiency and opportunity we need to address and apply resources and some significant consistencies from last year's survey. I know we'll have some time at the end of the webinar to address any questions you have, so please make sure you're making notes or writing your questions down and or submitting those to Ben, and we'll do our best to answer them then. I should also mention that the survey is evolving as we work to get more granular in our research, helping us to gain a better understanding of how to best help dealers deal with more difficult workforce conditions. If you were involved in the survey last year, you will notice we asked additional questions to gain clarity about how pressing some of the needs we've discovered are. So to start, let's look at just an executive summary. These 4 items summarize some of the key points regarding workforce development in our industry and are most definitely in line with what we've seen over the last 2 surveys. Number 1, hiring and recruiting management positions continues to be a major challenge. Service manager roles are still the most challenging to fill. There are a number of resources available for dealers, number of resources out there, but internal training is still the preferred method of training. And the largest portion of training dollars continues to be used to meet manufacturer requirements as opposed to really meeting the needs of the organization. And all of those are important when considering our objectives of the survey. Our objectives are simply this: to provide an analysis of long-term needs, to uncover more specific management development needs for both the technical side and the people side, to identify areas where NAIDA's Dealer Institute can continue to help our dealers grow and move forward, and then compare issues between the United States and Canada to better understand the similarities and the differences that are there. To give you an idea of how the contribution shakes out in these surveys every year, the next few slides, they really share the breakdown by size and mainline and country. You see on this slide that the percentage of folks who participated really lopsided in that 1 to 4 location with regard to contribution, but each of the other categories were represented respectively. And I think it's important to note that when you're talking about 8%, 5% from 10 to 15 plus, that represents an enormous number of rooftops. So it's really nice coverage of our population. All of these categories, are represented respectively, and that's vitally important as we work to understand the industry issues as a whole. Now, when looking at mainline contributions, you will see we had fairly even contributions across all colors, which really helps get the right feel for the industry as a whole. Now, I would make mention, please continue to contribute to this survey in the future. And if you haven't, if you're on this call and you haven't contributed to the survey, I can't stress to you the importance. Your contribution helps us get even better data. And this is vitally important as we work to help dealers find better routes to meet their needs, and also in making a case for potential financial assistance to offset the cost of getting us to where we want to be. When considering the contribution across borders, the percentages are somewhat reflective of the dealer population in both the US and Canada. So we have a very diverse group representing a large number of rooftops across North America. And that brings us to our first question in the survey, asking if dealers feel they have the bench strength to promote current staff into executive or mid-level management positions. And the glaring result here is 40% suggest that they don't or aren't sure if they do. And I think that just like the last 2 years, this speaks loudly to two things. One is, do we have the right people in our organization? And two, are we providing the right opportunities to develop our people for those specific roles? Now, this continues to be an issue and a topic of conversation as dealer organizations face the reality of an ever-changing, more sophisticated marketplace. I would be remiss, however, not to share that there has been a huge shift in this data since last year's survey, and it's the greatest shift of the survey that we've seen. Last year, these percentages were 27% were yes, 52% were no, and not sure was 21%. So basically 73% were either no or not sure, 27% yes. There's been a huge shift between last year and this year. And I'm not sure where the shift was, but it definitely should be noted. Following up on that question, CEOs were asked if they were doing enough to develop people into these roles. And again, the glaring percentage is that 61% say that they aren't, or that they aren't sure. 38% coming in saying, yes, yeah, we're doing enough to make sure that the folks that are filling these senior level, mid-level positions, we're doing enough to make sure that they're prepared to do that and do that well. But the glaring statistic is still that 61% say that they're either not or they're not sure. So we explored the resources available through the dealership to help in the development of our bench. And while we see an uptick in resources available, the number is still extraordinary. Overall, 48% of dealers say they're not doing enough to develop their next crop of managers. 36% indicate they don't have the resources, and 18% suggest that they're just not sure. So we wanted to find out how pressing some of the needs are. And we begin by asking about immediate, mid-level, and senior level positions. What we find interesting is immediate needs with regard to management isn't tremendous for any of these respective positions at this time, but service manager continues to be number one. The difference between this year and the last two is we gave specific timelines to consider to help dealers when considering how quickly the need must be addressed. And I just want you to look at some of these numbers very quickly. Service manager immediately, service manager 27%, way out there in front. Parts manager continues to be on the climb, 16%. Aftermarket manager, we know that dual role is continuing to grow in the industry, 8%. HR manager, 1%. Sales manager, 6%. The reason I wanted you to look at that is because as we move into the next slide and we put a timeline with it, changes some of those things. And while service manager stayed relatively the same, we see several other key areas jump up considerably. I mean, store manager went from 9% to 24%. Parts manager went from 16% to 21%. CFO from 0 to 15%. Sales manager from 6 to 17%. Aftermarket manager from 8 to 17%. HR manager from 1 to 12%. While the overall percentage isn't extremely alarming, the jump some of them took could have significant meaning, especially when you're talking about immediate. And immediate, when we're talking about immediate, we're talking 6 months or less. You jump 6 to 12 months, drastic changes in some of those percentages. And you see that again in our long-term needs. And I would suggest that here's where the rubber meets the road. When we begin to talk about long-term needs for key senior and mid-level managers, the numbers suggest we have a long way to go with a very short time to get there. And as you look at this graph statistically, every single category suggests we have significant needs in every single key area in our dealer organizations. Now, service managers continue to lead the way, but you look at store manager, GM, and it's creeping up there. It's not far behind. Now, this is especially revealing in how we have prepared our industry for the future. And I don't want to offend anyone here today, and that's not a secret, but I know sometimes we don't like to talk about this. The reality is we tend to be very reactive and only move when a fire has started, which ultimately costs us in a number of areas. But if there's one obvious thing that this graphic suggests, it's that we have to be better. We have to do better at planning out succession, that it's not a good route for us to go to wait until a position is open to start trying to figure out how we're going to fill that in the future. And this year we wanted to dive just a little deeper to better understand the topic of skill development, not just categorically by topic, but also more granular between what we will call technical and interpersonal, or technical and people skills. And this graphic shows there is a fairly even need across the Big Four for further development, with leadership emerging for the third year in a row as number one. But these answers represent agree, strongly disagree across the Big Four. Operational best practices, 45%. Leadership, the technical side, 49%. Understanding financials, 50%. That's a huge number. Leadership, people, understanding how to deal with people, over 50%, coming in at 55%. Now, here's how the breakdown shook out for leadership with regard to technical skills. Financial, 50%. Service department, 55%. Technical competencies, 56%. Management, all departments, 58%. Parts department, 61%. Whole goods department, 62%. Interdepartmental, 64%. The technical piece deals with things like financial understanding, scheduling, inventory control, policy and procedure expectations, those true technical pieces inside of what's expected from a leader in your dealer organization. I think the separation or differentiation of technical and personal skills, though, gives us a much clearer picture of where we need to go with regard to training and development. And it really helps us understand we need a better balance between the two. I'm reminded of one of the graphics that Dr. Cole often uses when discussing development. It's a railroad track, and if you will, just visualize a railroad track in your mind. And we understand in order for that track to be effective and for it to be safe, both of those tracks have to be maintained. And when Dr. Cole puts this up on the screen, he shows that train track and he asks folks in the class about which one is most important. And obviously everyone says both of them are. Then he puts up on the slide that one side is listed as technical and the other as people. And it's just a great visual to illustrate how important each are to the growth of our organization. Again, lots of consistency across the board where dealers feel they need improvement with skill development. I would point out the three highest: high-performing teamwork, retaining talent, and interdepartmental conflict, all of which are over 60%. This is a continuation. There were a number of items that were utilized on the people side. So this is a continuation of the answers to the question dealing with people skill development. I would point out three on this slide as well. We seem to have the most conversations about recently. One is strategic planning. Two is interviewing potential new hires. And three is onboarding new employees. Strategic planning is becoming more and more important as our customers become larger and more sophisticated. And their expectations as a buyer aren't what they were 20 years ago, or even, let's be honest, even 3 or 4 years ago. Retaining talent seems to get harder every year, but attracting the right people seems to be almost impossible at times. And the answer to the question why most directly points to the issues we have in the onboarding process. And all of that we know begins in the interview. And I think it's important for us all to understand that an interview often goes both ways. Not only are we interviewing a potential employee, but they are also interviewing a potential employer. And the question I would ask is, are we putting our best face forward? Some of the statistics in our analysis here in the survey would suggest that we're probably not in a lot of cases. I also know there are some organizations who have quite an extensive onboarding experience. It's really, really strong. It's really good. But the reality is most in our industry fail somewhat miserably in this particular area. The next few slides show preferences and most commonly used resources for training and development. And this slide shows both public and on-site courses as the preferred venue for training. And just to give you a definition, a public course would be one offered in a neutral location with a variety of dealers participating. And an on-site would be at a specific dealer organization focused only on their employees. And there is a note down at the bottom of this slide that suggested that virtual was included in the survey as an option, but came out as not a preferred mode of training. I think anyone that's been involved in training over the years understands there is a huge difference between that online experience, that virtual experience, and that classroom experience. I was surprised that it was not something that was higher rated, just to be honest, especially with the call for that over the last few years. And maybe coming out of COVID, there's another shift and people are wanting to get back together. I'm not really sure where that's at, but virtual classes came out of the survey as not a preferred mode. When asked about preferred training, category obviously determined the source. The overall preferred method for the 5 main areas in a dealer organization were really split between independent sources and the manufacturing. And it's interesting as we move to the next slide, because the most common training sources utilized are internal employees. Now, it's difficult to draw detailed conclusions based on the survey, but I think it's definitely worth looking at how the most obvious. Trying to think of the best way to say this. It's worth looking at the most obvious issues with regard to employee development needs against the most commonly used training methods. Now, it's not a perfect science, but I'm sure there's some correlation between the two. So then we compared the preferred to the most commonly used method, and the graphic speaks for itself. I'm not sure why the disconnect, but perhaps we'll explore it deeper in next year's survey. But if you look at the slide, in every area of content, leadership, financial, parts, service, and whole goods, you have a preferred method. Leadership, the preferred method is independent consulting. Financial, independent consulting. Parts, manufacturer. Service, manufacturer. Whole goods, independent consulting. But the most commonly used by a large number in this survey is definitely the internal employee. Now, the next two slides are always interesting and telling. And these questions deal specifically with the dollars spent across all modes of development and the percentage of our cash that goes to those specific resources. The results this year are in accordance with the last 2 years, with manufacturer training consuming our most of our developmental budget. Now, there are several areas where only the manufacturer can provide the training needed for certain things like tech certification, product knowledge, and so on. And with the changes in technology and sophistication of equipment, this will most likely continue to manufacturers where they require the same level of commitment from their dealers with regard to training. However, we have a number of areas identified in this survey outside of the manufacturer's purview that need addressed sooner than later. And it seems the need to invest in additional resources or additional sources to meet the need is imperative. Case in point to that last statement, a large majority of our training and developmental dollars are going and spent on facilitating the technical side of the business. I think this is a glaring statistic. 76% of all of our dollars are spent on the technical side. Only 24% is spent on the people side. There are a number of reasons why that is, but as you've seen, and I want to say this again, there is a great need to create balance in how we are developing people. Not all of the time, but most of the time we provide technical training, the employee feels the organization is only investing back into the organization. However, when we provide interpersonal development, when we are actually investing in that person's personal development, they feel the organization is investing in them. And there are some significant gains that we see in some of our higher performing dealer organizations that have realized that and have begun to make a shift. So not only do we need to do a better job of investing in our employees for the development, but we have glaring deficiencies in key areas that will only be closed when we get people performing at the highest level. And ultimately that is our goal. Now, I want to share a few key takeaways and some commentary provided by dealers who were involved in the survey. Number one is bench strength continues to be a challenge regardless of line. Doesn't matter what you carry, what you sell, bench strength continues to be a challenge. Dealers need their staff to be trained in recruiting employees and workforce development. And learning how to hire someone is a growing concern. Service managers are in high demand, both short and long-term needs. We saw that short-term 27%, long-term 66%. Huge issue. Continues to be the hardest position to successfully fill. And I mean, outside of just throwing somebody back there, it is the hardest position to successfully fill. I know there are some folks that have grown up in the service department. There are some leaders that have contributed and have been on this call that will tell you they believe the hardest position in the entire organization, the most difficult position in the entire organization is a service manager. There's increasing demand for store managers, for general managers compared to the 2021 survey. And as dealers expand, finding those capable people is a major concern. Where do we go now? There's an increasing demand for parts managers compared to the 2021 survey. And a lot of that has to do with a shift in the industry that took place a few years ago when we were going through the used equipment crisis, and more dealers realized the opportunity that was slipping through their fingers in the aftermarket departments. There was more money to be made in the service departments and the parts departments, and we started closing some of those gaps. So, when you consider that change that started happening in 2015 It's created this increased demand for qualified parts managers that really understand the completeness of their position. Leadership training continues to be in high demand. More and more organizations are realizing that it's one thing to understand some of those technical components and be able to articulate around those. It's altogether different being able to lead someone down the path of creating a successful and high-performing organization. And what we really want is to have a marriage of those two, to bridge a gap. And that's one of the reasons why leadership training continues to be high demand. Only 16% of respondents stated that they were doing enough to develop their own people. This is an enormous statistic to overcome, and I'm not sure that those that are on this call were necessarily prepared to see that. Maybe you are, but it's a glaring piece of kind of where we are with regard to workforce development. Only 16% said that they were doing enough to develop their own people. Almost half of the respondents stated there were enough training resources available, but they were just not being used. Very low preferences for manufacturer or manufacturer-sponsored training. However, it's where a majority of the training dollars are spent. And as I stated before, I don't see that going anywhere, especially with the constant changes and the competitive nature of building out the equipment that we're producing today. Dealership training continues to focus on technical training, although there is a much higher recognition of the need that we ought to spend elsewhere, that we really ought to focus on developing the people side of our dealers. Time continues to be an issue. And I think this is it's something for all of us to consider. I remember when I first started in this industry that we considered downtime in the industry. We were trying to create things in the industry for dealers to stay busy from November through February, and that's just not the case today. I mean, it's so many things have changed, and everybody is busy all the time. So dealers know that there needs to be an investment in training, but finding the time to do so, especially when you have multiple locations or you have a number of people, it's just very difficult to do so. And I would even suggest in some of your smaller organizations, when you have one person out, if you've got a parts manager that needs to go to training, when they're gone, it leaves a gaping hole in that organization. So time continues to be an issue. There continues to be a huge discrepancy between lines on the amount of annual dollars spent on training. When we look at those total numbers, it's incredible the differences depending on what color you are in the number of dollars that are spent on average for training. Internal training is most common. By far, it is by far the most common, but also is not necessarily the best training for a manager. Personal recruitment networking is the dominant approach to recruitment. Legacy issues continue. Service tech to service manager, that's the classic story of what do we do now that our service manager's retired or has left the organization. Well, it seems to be it's still the same today as it was 30 years ago, and that is the obvious choice is our best technician, and it's creating a lot of issues, and it goes back to what we were talking about before, and that is you put somebody in a position, but they're not necessarily receiving all of the pieces they need in order to be successful. Attrition issues are creating more and more challenges. We've got more people exiting than we're able to bring in, and it's creating a huge deficiency in our workforces. And dealers do not approach recruiting or training in a strategic way. And I hope that next year's survey, we have some hard data to go along with this, some statistic analysis where we can share kind of our findings there. But this industry has a tendency to be somewhat incestuous, and instead of bringing new people into the industry, it seems like in order to solve our issues with employee numbers, the way that it's most commonly dealt is to take someone from a dealer down the road. And I will say that's not always the wrong thing to do, right? It's just that's the nature of the beast. It's part of doing business. But we've got to figure out a way to bring more people back into the industry so that we're not just picking each other off all the time. I wanted to share a few of the comments that came in as well from folks, because there was an opportunity for people to kind of just share their thoughts on some things, and these are in no particular order. So just bear with me as I share some of these. Now, this is interesting because the first one, and I just printed these off, so I didn't know that this was in this order, but dealers resort to headhunting for employees from other farm equipment dealers needs to be addressed and stopped. All this does is create additional needs to fill positions that have been headhunted. Labor shortage will not be resolved by this. Another respondent said, we currently have the training as a strategic initiative for 2023 at their dealership. It's a very big hole, and the survey was quite timely. We are constantly using in-house and outside training sources. There's never not a need for more training. It's just a matter of how much you can fit into your schedule and budget while prioritizing servicing your customers. We've recently started developing our own in-house leadership program for non-management employees with great success. This will be one of the many tools we'll continue to develop alongside our external training programs. The next person said, as a family-owned, managed, and employed business, we have unique circumstances to bridge in all future planning with regards to training. Somebody just wrote in, need hiring sources for technicians. Currently, we're strongly working away from being a strongly task-oriented organization to a more balanced organization where developing people is key to the growth and success. Leadership is just changed at the top, which is allowing us to head in that direction. Another respondent said, our industry is in desperate need of mechanics. Somehow recruitment and education needs to be done nationally. Most dealer organizations know enough about their businesses to teach operational financial aspects of the business, but they don't even know where to start when it comes to intentionally growing and developing people into effective leaders of others. Somebody else simply said, our biggest challenge today is finding new employees to hire. Someone else said, I feel we have the technical training, but could use more training in dealing with the public and with our customers. Training that is geared to our schedule and our needs, parts, service, and whole goods would all benefit from short, specific courses that could be offered according to our seasonal schedule. In order to take this to somebody else, in order to take our organization to the next level, we need to invest in training that are both beneficial to the employee and the employer. We have good thoughts, but need to follow through. And I would just say in conclusion, although we have what I think a lot would consider a long way to go, the reality is we're getting better. Now, I would say it's slowly, but it is surely. We're getting better. However, the survey points to the reality that we need to be more proactive. And if there's a word that I would ask you to kind of take away from today, it is that word proactive. We have to be more proactive in our development of people, and that we need more help than we may realize. Now, this doesn't always mean someone from the outside has to come in and upset the apple cart and do it for you. I would suggest that sometimes our vision is so blurred internally that we miss those who could help us the most. I would encourage you to reach out if you need any guidance or are trying to find resources to bridge any of the gaps in your organization. And on behalf of NAIDA and the Dealer Institute, I want to thank all of you for being here today. Really, really appreciate your attendance and your participation in the survey. And I would ask Ben if there are any questions, if anyone has a question. I'm happy to do my best to answer those.
And like he said, we do have some time set up for Q&A portion here. If anybody has a question, they can use the option at the bottom to put some in, and we do have a couple. So, and I will just answer Deb Franklin, who came in late. Yes, a replay of the webinar will be available once we're done. So we had a couple questions come in, and one of them was about how the survey found that virtual classes are not preferred among dealers, and if there was a good reason for that, or if it was maybe a missed opportunity for dealers to utilize those.
Ben, that's a great question, and it was one of those things where, and I can just give a Dealer Institute's perspective on that. I can't answer if there's anyone else on the call that is delivering training in the industry, but from the Dealer Institute perspective, we really hadn't gone down that road before pre-COVID, and COVID shoved us into that rather harshly, and we were blown away with the uptake of folks that were involved. And I would say I'm not sure. I'd like to get a little more data, and hopefully we can explore that next year, because we've seen an incredible number of dealers who've taken advantage of that virtual piece, especially with your general labor force. It's difficult to send multiple parts people out to a training where they've got to either fly somewhere or drive an extensive amount of time or stay overnight. So I feel like that virtual piece really gives people an opportunity to take advantage of that resource, where they, if it were just an in-person offering, where they might not have that opportunity. So I do think maybe it is more of a missed opportunity for some. But I also understand that, coming out of COVID, people were starved for that, that touch, that feel, like seeing somebody sit across the table. And make no mistake about it, the experience in a classroom, there's a huge difference between the experience that you have when you're sitting, behind a computer, as opposed to sitting in a class with peers and you've got someone that's face to face with you, helping you with your learning experience. There's a dynamic that you can't duplicate virtually. But as I said, I think it opens the door to some people who might not otherwise have that opportunity, and it's proven that it can be very effective and very powerful. So I'm looking forward to kind of how those results come in the survey this coming year, because I would see us drilling down into that. Great question.
Yeah, great. Okay. We had another one come in that just asked, Michael, if you have any tips for dealers who want to rely less on internal training if they're trying to use some of those other sources that the survey found dealers prefer.
That another great question. There are a number of really high quality resources in our industry with regard to training and education. I would suggest that you meet with those that are available and talk through kind of what solutions they have. There are a couple of things, in my opinion, that I think really, and your higher performing dealer organizations have already figured this out. One is, it seems like in our industry, anytime there's a problem, we're running to put out a fire. And it seems like a lot of leaders spend a lot of time just running around putting out fires instead of doing a root cause analysis. So, I would, if I were in a dealer's position, I would interview a lot of the resources that are out there, and see if they've got some type of a system that helps you identify and prepare a path to, take care of every need that you have in your organization. And that means, try not to get too far off track here, but that means that, not necessarily addressing everything at once, but at least helping you create a plan and a path to get to each of those items at some point. But I think that, getting out there, meeting folks, interviewing them just like you would an employee, talking about their experience, gaining as much data from them as possible. I think that's the route. That's a suggestion I would go. I mean, ask the questions, get out and meet some of the folks that are out there providing training and education into this industry.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just say this on that too. There are a number of resources, the external resources that are outside of the industry, which and I don't want to belittle what they do, because a lot of them have contributed some very strong things into our industry. But that's another thing that I think is important when you're looking for a resource is what kind of experience do they have in the industry? Are these guys, are they former successful leaders, in the construction, in the ag industry? And how relevant is their message to kind of where we are? I think that's another important piece to be looking for.
Great. Okay. And the last one we had come in was, speaking of a root cause analysis, if so many people in the industry are trying to find or train up service managers, somebody asked, what could we possibly change about the role of a service manager that would see us not so many people needing to find them or train up a service manager?
I think that really having a clear understanding of what is expected, I'm not sure it's changing the role. I think it's a clarity around what really is expected would have a huge impact on our ability to find the right people. I'll just give you a brief example. I was working with a dealer organization who had hired a service manager, and the dealer called me, I don't know, 6 to 8 months later, and was very frustrated and wanted help with some disciplinary action with that particular service manager. And so I asked the dealer to send me a job description. And I'm sure everyone on this call can imagine what the answer to that question was. Would you send me the job description? Well, the answer to that question was, well, we don't have a job description. And so my next question was, well, send me an outlay of all of the the training that you've sent this particular person to help them learn how to maximize their scheduling, to ensure that they have their head wrapped around the KPIs that a service manager needs to understand in order to be successful. And I'm sure everyone on this call again knows that when I asked for that, the answer that I received was, well, we hadn't had time to send them training yet. And my third question was, well, that's all right. Send me a copy of their latest performance evaluation. And obviously that was not provided either. And I know that there are some organizations that are better at those three things than others, but the reality is expectation, I think, is everything. And it's really hard to gauge someone's performance when you haven't set an adequate expectation. When you have just in your head what you expect somebody to do, and there's, I guess, this unwritten idea that person should read your mind and understand, it's very difficult for somebody to fill that role according to something that you have in your head. And it brings up a very important point, and this goes across every avenue inside of a dealer organization. When it comes to roles, responsibilities, and expectations, we have to communicate better. It is vitally important to have a job description, and those job descriptions may change. There may be things that are added, there may be things that are taken away, but there's a reason that you have a job description. Performance evaluations are key. How are they performing against your expectation? And if they're a leader, if they're a senior level or a mid-level leader, they ought to have access to the financial performance of their department, because it's very difficult to hold someone accountable for a financial metric that they never get to see or they don't understand. So, when it comes to service management, I would argue with anybody who says differently. I agree with the trainer of ours that has suggested that the service management role is the most difficult to fill. I would highly recommend anybody that is considering being a service manager or is really looking to recruit and retain high quality service managers to have those three key pieces in place. Expectation it's too difficult to try to sift through when there's not a clear understanding. Am I making sense, Ben? Am I answering your question?
That's a great answer from my point of view. Yeah. Sounds like exactly what they were looking for. Okay. That was all the questions we had. I'll allow a few seconds here. If anybody has one they want to type in, they can throw it in there, and Michael will pass over to you.
Ben, I would, I know that it is on the slide, but I would just remind everyone that if they would like a copy of the survey, we do have those available. Just give me a shout.
Okay. And I'm not seeing any questions, so I think with that we can wrap up here. So again, today's presentation will be available on the Farm Equipment website later on if you'd like to go back and review anything. And you can watch your email and the Farm Equipment newsletter for more information. So on behalf of Michael and the North American Equipment Dealers Association, as well as the Farm Equipment staff, I want to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. And feel free to reach out and let us know what you thought of this event and if there's any topics you want us to cover in the future so you can learn about them. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Michael. And everybody, enjoy the rest of your day.